Have you been stressed, anxious, or worried? Have you felt pangs of loneliness in recent times? Are you longing for greater connection with others in the world around you? In a phrase, are you looking for happiness? You are not alone. Millions of others are seeking this feeling of spiritual, mental, and physical wellness too. This podcast explores the underlying causes of unhappiness and shares with us the secrets of rewriting the frequent thoughts and redirecting the common behaviors that keep us in that state. Join forensic psychologist and best-selling author Dr. Neehall and her guests as they dive deep in the realm of psychological wellness and explore ways of finding happiness on demand.
Hi everyone. Today I thought we'd talk a little bit about loneliness, which detracts from our happiness quotient. And our podcast is all about happiness on demand, right? Loneliness is a universal human experience. It's ubiquitous. It doesn't matter which culture we're in, we can experience that phenomenon of loneliness. Didn't we during lockdown a couple of years ago? Unfortunately, lockdown is finished, but we're still experiencing a measure of loneliness. And it's more than feeling physically alone. I'm talking about that subjective feeling of disconnect, of isolation, of a lack of meaningful social contact. So you could be around people and still feel lonely. While solitude can be chosen and enjoyed, loneliness is often involuntary and very distressing. Recent research in my field of psychology has shown that loneliness can have significant implications for mental and physical health. Chronic loneliness has been linked to increased risk of cardiovascular disease, substance abuse, depression, anxiety, a weakened immune system. Did you know that? It can also impair cognitive function and lead to negative self-talk, negative self-perceptions, further perpetuating that cycle of isolation. What are some of the reasons for it? Look, it can be very challenging because of its subjective nature. I can put two people in identical social situations and they'll experience vastly different levels of loneliness based on their individual perceptions and psychological resilience. In addition, loneliness can be influenced by factors such as personality traits, attachment styles, social skills, and what about past experiences of rejection and abandonment? Understanding the mechanisms of loneliness is crucial for developing effective interventions, which I want to talk about now. We've identified in psychology several key factors that contribute to loneliness, such as the following, and I present them to you to think about. Perhaps they're applicable to you or to a friend or someone you know. Social skills. Difficulties in initiating or maintaining social connections can contribute to feelings of loneliness. People who struggle with social skills may find it more difficult to form and sustain meaningful relationships. What about attachment style? Our early experiences with caregivers can shape our attachment styles, influencing how we perceive and approach relationships in adulthood. Insecure attachment styles characterized by fear of rejection or abandonment can predispose us to loneliness. Then there's perceived social support. The perception of having supportive relationships rather than the actual number of relationships is crucial for combating loneliness. Even people with large social networks can feel lonely at times if they perceive their relationships are merely superficial or lacking in emotional intimacy. Then there's cognitive biases. Lonely people may have negative cognitive biases that distort their perceptions of social interactions, leading them to interpret ambiguous cues as signs of rejection or disinterest. And that's a big one to challenge. You need to challenge that. Is it really that person getting up to leave the room for a glass of water a personal rejection, or could it just be something they needed to do? So watch out for your self-talk. And then there's cultural and societal factors. Cultural norms and societal changes can influence the prevalence and experience of loneliness. Factors such as urbanization, social media use, and changing family structures can impact social connections and contribute to feelings of isolation. We had those during COVID-19. Now, addressing loneliness requires a multifaceted approach, I think, because it addresses both individual and societal factors. This may involve interventions aimed at improving social skills, challenging negative thought patterns, fostering supportive relationships, and promoting community engagement. Moreover, creating environments that prioritize social connectiveness and inclusivity can help reduce feelings of loneliness on a broader scale. So we have to look at it from the macrocosm, not just the microcosm. How can we do this on a societal basis so that people can feel more included instead of left out? Ultimately, recognizing and addressing loneliness as a psychological phenomenon is essential in promoting mental well-being and building resilient communities where individuals like you and I can feel valued, supported, and connected. And remember, who was it who said that? It was Darwin in Evolution of the Species. Those communities showing a higher degree of kindness had a greater chance of survival. Shouldn't we be promoting interconnectedness and reaching out to other people?
We hope you're finding this presentation on loneliness helpful. In the following segment, Dr. Neehall and Alyn Edwards further explore this topic of loneliness. Enjoy.
My wife grew up in a little town in northwestern Ontario of 800 people. It's called Beardmore. Everybody knew everybody. Her father was the town grocer and the town butcher, so everybody came into the store. They cared about each other, and what resulted from that has been lifelong friendships. But not everybody lives in a small town. When I'm thinking back to my childhood, we lived in a suburban area, but my parents knew all the neighbors. We had house parties. So the neighbors visited every weekend, and deep friendships developed. And then in medieval times, from then on, they had town centers where people gathered in the town square. We don't have that anymore. We have social media. Is that part of the problem of this epidemic of loneliness and lack of meaningful friendships?
Alyn, you were asking a very important question. You grew up and people knew you. Your wife was in a small town. I grew up in a very small place too. And so it was like a little village in which we knew each other. I knew my friends' parents. I knew where they lived. After school, I could go hang out at their place and vice versa. That's sort of, and then house parties you talk about. I think of that with nostalgia because nowadays we don't have as many of those as I sure wish we did, because that would be a brilliant way to really connect. Because with loneliness, there is a lack of connection. And the lack of connection is due to what you mentioned, online or being involved in with your devices at the cost of spending time with others. I call it hyperconnectivity. That is, that we're so connected with the internet, with our devices, that we run out of time to spend time with other people, to really get to know other people. And it doesn't even have to be the public fair or the get together at someone's home, but just spending time. And people don't do that, and yet they waste time. Notice the verbs I'm using: spending time, wasting time, or killing time by being on the internet or being with their devices on whatever social media they're involved in. Because, you can have thousands of friends, thousands of followers, but in the last analysis, you could be incredibly lonely because of a lack of connection.
I understand that, and I'm thinking of the causes of loneliness. If you could give some more of these causes. I think some people isolate themselves because they may not think they're worthy of making friends, getting in touch with relatives. In some cases, it's people's faults that they're lonely. Wouldn't you agree?
Um, well, let me answer that question by going back 2 steps, because I think it's a very important point you're raising. What's the cause of loneliness? And is it that people are just isolating? Well, I think, when I think of my own clinic, I think of people telling me, well, you're telling me, Joan, to go out and form friends, but I work online. I shop for groceries online. I even do yoga online. I do everything online. To which I say, that's fine, but can you get out of your home, go for a walk, smile at people, make some social contact? So isolation is one of the reasons why people are lonely. There's also, it's like a layer cake. There's physical isolation. If you're going to isolate yourself, as we did a couple of years ago during the pandemic, and we homeschooled and worked from home and everything was from home. We distanced. And as a result of that, it's taken its toll on friendships because we still practice some measure of distancing. Some people tell me, I don't know how to form a friend now. And they go through this negative self-talk. Who would find me interesting? How much of myself do I share with someone without dominating the conversation? Well, they think I'm crazy. So these are the things that people might say which will prevent them from forming friends. And I say to people, when you're starting that negative self-talk or you're going down the rabbit hole of despair, how about answering the following question? How would your best friend describe you? And invariably, Alyn, they come up with a host of adjectives from empathic, non-judgmental, kind, caring, generous, smart, witty, sense of humor. Okay, on and on. And I say to them, okay, use your imagination and be curious. Think of when you were a child, when you played makeup games, let's pretend that, or dress up games, or I pretended I was Roy Rogers, or we were playing, cowboys and Indians, or whatever we were playing. We used our imagination. Now, can you use your imagination when you get into a social gathering, a cocktail party, a meeting with others, and put on those adjectives, but make them become verbs? Do humorous, do exciting, do outgoing, because the acceptance prophecy does exist. If you are primed to thinking people are going to like you and find you interesting, you become interesting. So we're getting through the art of friendship through the back door by makeup, like let's dress up, let's pretend we are that person our friend described us as, and let us assume with acceptance prophecy that people are going to find me incredibly interesting.
Well,
So
I hope they do. Yeah. I
but
think
yeah, but to go on with your point, there's another reason why people can be lonely. There is a temporary change in marital status when you break up with someone, and then all of a sudden some of your friends unfriend you. Or as the woman said to me, now I'm a widow, people don't want to hang out with me anymore because they think I'm going to go after their husband. So that's really sad. Or so it could be a phase of life change. It could also be a loneliness because you've geographically moved from one state or one province to another and you uproot yourself, right? So these are all reasons why. It could be phase of life, it could be geography, it could be self-talk. These are all the reasons why we would have a fertile ground for the production of loneliness.
when my father retired in Toronto, my mother had the heat on to move to Vancouver, where she was raised and her family was, and he did. And I remember he joined the, excuse me, he joined the yacht club, he joined the curling club, he joined the golf club, he joined a church, all in an effort to make friends. And is that something that's advisable? Get involved and meet people?
That is brilliant. And I would say your father was spot on. He nailed it, because you have to make yourself visible. And that involves effort. I mean, your father obviously had confidence in himself and in his ability to get out there and be visible. And I think we all need to take what you just said to heart and start doing that. Get out there, do a volunteer activity, do things with like-minded people. In Canada, we have meetup groups. You like hiking? Go join a group. A second language? Go join a group. Groups are very useful for that, Alyn.
From being a reporter for 30 years, I know that in the extreme, loneliness can result in suicide. And do we see an increasing amount of despair because of loneliness now?
Yes. In fact, Theresa May created the Ministry of Loneliness way back before the pandemic. And she had a minister for loneliness because in the UK, she was able to say, hey, this is an issue now. People are not really connecting with others, they're incredibly lonely. If you're isolated, you might fall prey to depression. You might have a greater chance if you are clinically depressed and not seeking help. Yes, you could be a victim of suicide. But I would like to believe that everyone listening to me today and to you would take heart and confidence in getting out there and meeting people and being vulnerable and saying, hey, I'm having a bad time today. Remember, we talked about your friend watching your back, and your friend will help to walk you through your purple funk, as I call it, and move you out of that.
I know from listening to your podcast and reading your book that loneliness and other psychological issues can impact your physical health. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, there is a definite correlation between physical and mental health. What we have found is that if you are not happy, you are more prey to cardiovascular disease, stress, insomnia, hypertension, ulcerative colitis, and on it goes. Whereas if you are happy or you can experience a modicum of fulfillment in your life, your intrapersonal relationship or your relationship with yourself and your relationship with others or your interpersonal relationship improves significantly, exponentially. In fact, in the longitudinal study on happiness, what was found is that the most important variable for happiness is, and the antidote to loneliness is quite literally a good social support network.
I've
And
been talking to, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
well, I was going to say that that's ubiquitous. It's cross-cultural. We found this.
I've been talking to a number of aging friends of mine. Some have lost their spouse, their wives, and they tell me that the evenings are the lonely part. They can keep themselves active in the daytime, but when they always were together with their spouse, it was usually in the evenings, and they're really fighting the loneliness. Any advice you can give them as a clinical psychologist?
I think, that's a very good point because it's the phase of life or the transitional loneliness that you're talking about, a change in marital status. I think it's brilliant if people can, like your friend, can identify that's their point of no return. That's the worst time for them. Okay, that's a time perhaps to sip into a martini or to do some things that, not that there's anything wrong with a martini, but when you start overdoing it with alcohol or whatever drug of your choices, it's going to make things worse for you. So that's the point when you know that this is my point of weakness, you need to set yourself up. It's like going to war, okay? And have some friends like Alyn Edwards in your back pocket to say, hey, I'll come over with your wife. Or, can I afflict myself on you? And so the person needs to get out and do things to be with other people, because what that friend is saying is that I am feeling lonely. This is when I would miss my wife. So what is he really saying? He's saying I miss companionship. And that's fundamental. The fundamental antidote to loneliness is that ability to connect with others, to have the companionship. So your friend needs to get out and join some groups that are going through recently widowed or separated or divorced people. But more important, connect with his previous friends and say, hey, this is where I need some help. Because people usually find at a funeral that they just don't know what to say. We're at a loss for words, believe it or not. And the nicest thing you can do is to teach someone how to love you well by saying, hey, this is what I really need from you. Marjorie has passed. I find the nights very hard. Can you suggest some things that we can do together? And can you give me some ideas as well? Brainstorm what other things I can be doing.
Yeah, maybe people can take a look back in their lives and think of things that they couldn't do because of the time and want to do, and then get into a group of people that are like-minded, hiking, woodwork, reading, book clubs, that kind of thing. Would you suggest that?
That's That's okay. That's good for an antidote to loneliness and to form friendships. But I think what you were talking about was a bit deeper than that. What you were talking about is the painful loss of someone, your partner, and that huge gap. I say it's like if you open up the palm of your hand and all of those spaces in between your fingers used to be filled by Marjorie, I'm saying, and now Marjorie is gone and you got to fill them. Okay. So that's different. When you asked me the question, I thought, oh, that's what people will usually say to me, Alyn, when they have recently retired. Now I have time to do woodworking and so on. But when you talk about a person feeling incredibly lonely because of the loss of their soulmate, we have to take a different tack.
Okay, one other thought that comes to my mind is that if people are in despair, what assistance can a psychologist give them?
First of all, we have hotlines that people can use for free. They can go into social services and see what's available. And in fact, we have in every province that I'm aware of in Canada, we're blessed by having incredibly gifted psychologists who would be more than happy to guide the person through the process that they're going through if they've tried everything else and nothing else works. So I would encourage them to call the governing board of the Psychology Association in the province they're at, and they would provide them with a list of names of certified registered clinical psychologists who are willing to help them through with depression, loss, grief, whatever the problem is on an emotional level or
My,
behavioral.
my last question is when you think back on treating patients, what patient's experience stands out in your mind as possibly a really severe case of loneliness? And how are you able to help that person?
Yes, let me think about which one, because you're talking about 40 years now of work. I guess the one that stands out as you talked, and I'll give him a generic name, is Wayne. And I worked with Wayne in conjunction with a psychiatrist. And together we worked with Wayne because he was a paranoid schizophrenic patient, which meant for him he could not maintain relationships. Now, this is a case that's very atypical. So if you're listening to me right now, be aware that Alyn asked me for which case stood out. And this one, it was a really sad case because when Wayne would come off his telescene, he would become very paranoid. And as a result of this, he could not form friendships. So he was lonely, but it was a double-edged sword for him. And the recourse that the psychiatrist, Carl, and myself worked on was I was doing the behavioral component and the cognitive component. Carl was doing the psychopharmacological component of keeping him on an even keel.
And did it work?
When he was compliant with the medication he was on, yes. When he was not compliant, he was dangerous to himself and to others.
Well, it's a very good topic, talking about the epidemic of loneliness. It's a very real situation, and if people want further information, how can they get it?
They can easily contact me on my website or email me on joan@neehall.com or go to the podcast and they'll get more information there. And in fact, Alyn, what they can also do is to go to the podcast that you and I have done. We've done quite a few right now, and I would encourage all of you listeners to go back and take a look at how many we've done and how interesting some of the topics are, because they range from loneliness, isolation, ghosting, narcissism, sexuality, and on and on. So have fun with it. And
And
Alyn,
your book? You
yeah,
talk about your book, Happy is the New Healthy?
yes,
Good read.
they could go to my book, Happy is the New Healthy, and find out exactly what you were asking, namely the symbiotic relationship between physical and mental health. And Alyn,
Yeah, what I learned from your book is you can change your own channel. You can make a difference in your own life. There's lots in that book.
yes, you can. And I'm a strong believer in that you can always, always do things on your own to change your channel.
Thank you, Dr. Joan Neehall.
Thank you, Alyn. Appreciate it. Bye-bye now.
Bye now.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others. And if you would like to send me a note about it, feel free to on my email, joan@neehall.com. Thanks a lot for listening. Bye now.
Thank you for joining this discussion on happiness. We hope this helps to inspire you to lead a more joyful life. To dive deeper into the subject of happiness, be sure to check out Dr. Neehall's book, Happy is the New Healthy, available as an ebook or hardcover. For additional resources, visit our website at drneehall.com. Until next time, stay happy.